She found a 50-year-old note in her father's Bible that said, "I was forced to make this choice." This is a profound story about the secrets that families keep and the truths that can change everything. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single clue in this incredible mystery. The old family Bible had sat on the mantelpiece for my entire life. It's a heavy, leather-bound book, its pages worn thin and soft by the hands of generations. Its front pages are a testament to our family's history, a sprawling map of births, deaths, and marriages written in my mother's elegant script. But the note I found, tucked inside it last week, behind the brittle page of the Book of Job, that's a history I never knew. Just a few words in my father's familiar slanted hand. "I ask forgiveness for everything, but I was forced to make this choice." My name is Genevieve, and I am 65 years old. My father, Samuel, is 88. He is a quiet, dignified man, a retired deacon of our church, a man everyone in our community respects. And for the past week, since I found that note, I have looked at this man I've known my whole life and seen a stranger, a man with a 50-year-old secret locked behind his tired eyes. You're about to hear the story of how I found that note and the investigation it launched. But if you knew what that choice was, the one my good, decent father was forced to make so long ago, you'd understand that some family histories are written not in ink, but in secrets and lies. My mother passed away 2 months ago. Her death was peaceful, but it left a silence in our lives that was deafening. My father, always a quiet man, seemed to retreat even further into himself. As his only child, I took it upon myself to begin the painful task of sorting through my mother's things. That's how I found the Bible. I had taken it down from the mantelpiece to dust, and as I reverently flipped through the worn pages, the small folded note slipped out. I was forced to make this choice. What choice? What could my father, a man of unwavering faith and moral certainty, have been forced to do that required such a cryptic, guilt-ridden confession? I decided to confront him. I found him sitting on the back porch, looking out at my mother's beloved rose garden. I sat down beside him, the note in my hand. "Daddy," I began gently, "I was looking through Mama's Bible, and I found this." I handed him the note. He unfolded it, his old, gnarled hands trembling slightly as he read the words he had written so long ago. A deep, shuddering sigh escaped his lips, a sound of immense, ancient sorrow. "I hoped you'd never find that, Genevieve," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the garden, but seeing something else entirely, something from a lifetime ago. "What choice, Daddy?" I asked, my voice soft. "What did you do?" He shook his head, a look of profound pain on his face. "Some things are better left buried, Genevieve. It's in the past. Let it rest." "I can't," I insisted. "That note, it doesn't sound like something that's resting. It sounds like something that's been haunting you." He wouldn't say more. He just folded the note, handed it back to me, and said, "Your mother was a good woman, the best. I did what I had to do to protect her, to protect this family." And that was it. He retreated back into his wall of silence, but he had given me a clue. To protect her. Protect her from what? My investigation began in the attic, a dusty archive of our family's life. I started searching for anything from that time, from 50 years ago. I looked at old photo albums, at my mother's diaries, and I found it. A gap, a strange 6-month gap in my mother's otherwise meticulous daily diary entries, a period where the pages were simply blank. It was the year before I was born. What had happened in those 6 months? My mother had one sibling, my Aunt Clara, her younger sister, who lived in Chicago. She and my father had never been particularly close. There was always a strange, unspoken tension between them, a coolness I had never understood. She was my only living relative who would know the truth. I called her. "Aunt Clara," I said after the usual pleasantries, "I need to ask you about something from a long time ago, about Mama. There's a gap in her diaries from the year before I was born." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, honey," she finally said, her voice full of a sorrow I hadn't heard in years. "I always wondered if you'd ask. Your father made me promise never to speak of it." "He's the reason I'm calling," I said. "I found a note from him. He said he was forced to make a choice to protect her." "What did he mean, Aunt Clara? What happened in those 6 months?" She sighed, a sound like rustling dry leaves. "He wasn't protecting her from something, Genevieve," she said softly. "He was protecting her from someone." And then she told me the story. 50 years ago, my mother, a bright, beautiful young woman, had been engaged to another man, a man my father had introduced her to, a man who was his best friend. But this man, this friend, had a dark side, a violent temper that he kept hidden from the world. One night, he had attacked my mother, beaten her so badly she had ended up in the hospital. My father, upon discovering what his best friend had done, was consumed by a righteous fury and a terrible guilt. He confronted the man, and the confrontation had turned violent. My father, a quiet, gentle man, had beaten the other man half to death to protect the woman he loved. But the man came from a wealthy, powerful family. They had threatened to destroy my father, to have him sent to prison for assault for the rest of his life, but they offered him a deal. They would make it all go away, drop all charges, on one condition, that my mother, the only witness, never testify, that she disappear, and that the story be buried forever. And that was the choice my father was forced to make to save himself from prison, to protect my mother from the trauma of a public trial and the potential retaliation from a powerful family. He convinced her to go away with him, to start a new life, to marry him, and to bury the secret of the man who had hurt her and the violent way my father had protected her. The note in the Bible wasn't a confession of his own sin. It was a confession of the terrible choice he had made to protect his future wife, a choice that had forced him to betray his own principles of truth and justice, a choice that had haunted him for 50 years. The family history I knew was built on a foundation of a violent, buried secret, and my quiet, gentle father was a man who had been capable of a terrible, righteous rage, all for the love of my mother. I ended the call with my Aunt Clara, my hand trembling as I placed the receiver back in its cradle. The quiet of my mother's house was suddenly deafening, filled with the ghosts of a story I had never known. My father, my quiet, gentle, church-going father, a man who had beaten another man half to death, a man who had built his entire life, our entire family, on a foundation of a terrible secret, a forged choice. The image I had had of him my whole life, that of a stoic, peaceful man, shattered into a million pieces, replaced by something far more complex, more dangerous, and in a strange, terrifying way, more profound. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, in his armchair, the family Bible lying open on the ottoman before me. I stared at the note, at his familiar slanted script. I was forced to make this choice. The words no longer held a mystery, but the weight of a lifetime of guilt. He had done it to protect my mother. He had chosen a life of quiet hypocrisy to save her from the trauma of a trial, to save himself from the vengeance of a powerful family. He had chosen love, but a violent, secret-keeping love. And he had carried that burden alone for over 50 years. The anger I had expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, there was a deep, aching wave of understanding, a profound pity for the young man my father had been, forced into an impossible corner, and an even deeper admiration for the man he became, the man who had channeled that potential for violence into a lifetime of quiet dignity and unwavering devotion to my mother. He hadn't buried his past because he was a liar. He had buried it because he was a protector. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. This secret could no longer stand between us. I found him where I knew he would be, on the back porch, looking out at my mother's roses, his Bible resting in his lap. I sat down beside him, not with an accusation, but with a quiet sense of purpose. "I spoke to Aunt Clara yesterday, Daddy," I said softly. He didn't flinch, didn't look at me. He just closed his eyes, a long, slow sigh escaping his lips. "I figured you might," he whispered. "Clara never could keep a secret. She didn't want to, but she kept yours for 50 years, out of love for her sister and out of fear of you, I think." He finally turned to look at me, and in his old, tired eyes, I saw the full, crushing weight of his life's great secret. "So now you know," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Now you know your father is not the man you thought he was. He's a man who almost took a life." "No," I said, my own voice surprisingly firm. "Now I know my father is a man who would do anything to protect the woman he loved. I want you to tell me, Daddy, not what Aunt Clara told me. I want to hear it from you, all of it." And so he did. For the first time in my 65 years, my father began to speak of the past he had kept locked away. He told me about my mother before he had married her, about her brilliant light, her infectious joy. He told me about his best friend, the man he had trusted like a brother, and the sickening, slow dawning of the realization that his friend had a darkness inside him, a possessive, violent streak that was aimed at my mother. He described the night he found her, after the attack. The details were sparse, his voice choked with a 50-year-old pain, but I could see the scene in my mind's eye. My father, finding the woman he adored bruised and broken, his grief turning into a righteous fury so absolute it was like a force of nature. "I didn't think, Genevieve," he whispered, his gaze lost in the past. "I just acted. I found him at a bar, bragging to his friends, and something inside me snapped. I don't remember all of it clearly, just the weight of my own fists and the satisfaction of seeing him fall. I almost didn't stop." He paused, his hands trembling. "When it was over, I knew I had crossed a line, but I didn't regret it. Not for a second. I defended her honor. I defended her." Then he told me of the aftermath, the powerful family, the threats, the lawyers, the terrible choice they presented him with, prison for him and a humiliating public trial for my mother, or silence, a lifetime of silence. "It wasn't a choice at all," he said, looking at me, his eyes full of tears. "To protect your mother's peace, her safety, her reputation, I would have made a deal with the devil himself. So I did. I made a deal with them. We left town, we married, we started a new life, and we never, ever spoke of it again. It was the price of our life together. My silence was the price." He had carried this burden, this secret of his own capacity for violence and the knowledge of my mother's trauma alone for our entire lives. He had built our family, our happy, peaceful family, on the foundation of that one terrible, violent act of love. He had protected us, but the secret had been his prison. I reached out and took his old, trembling hand in mine. It was the hand of a deacon, a man of peace, but it was also the hand of a warrior, a man who had fought for his family. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Daddy," I whispered. He squeezed my hand, his shoulders shaking with the silent sobs of a man finally, after a lifetime, unburdening his soul. The secret was out, here, between us, and our family history, which I had thought was a simple, straightforward story, had just been rewritten into something far more complex, more painful, and infinitely more profound. The man I had always known as my father was gone. In his place was a stranger I was only just beginning to meet, a man I loved even more for the terrible choice he had made. Sharing my father's secret felt like we were suddenly co-conspirators in a 50-year-old crime. Our relationship transformed. The quiet, respectful distance that had always existed between us was replaced by a new, fragile intimacy. We talked for hours, revisiting the past, him filling in the gaps, me just listening, trying to understand the weight he had carried. But with the main secret revealed, a new question began to haunt my thoughts, a loose thread I couldn't stop pulling at. What happened to the other man, the first fiancé, the man my father had beaten? My father only knew his name, Marcus Thorne, and that his family was wealthy and powerful back then. He didn't know what became of him after they left town. He had never wanted to know. For him, Marcus Thorne was a ghost he had buried that night. But for me, he was a missing piece of the puzzle. I needed to know the end of his story to fully understand the beginning of mine. My investigation started again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about his. Using the old newspaper archives, I found mentions of the Thorne family, a prominent name in state politics and business back in the 60s and 70s. And I found him, Marcus Thorne. There were a few articles about a promising young man from a powerful family, and then nothing. Around the time my parents married and left town, his name simply vanished from the society pages. I dug deeper, using genealogical websites and public records. I found what I was looking for in an old, digitized census record from 20 years ago. Marcus Thorne, living in a small, quiet town in northern Florida, listed as unemployed. It seemed the powerful family had not been able to save him from whatever demons haunted him. With more searching, I found a current address, a small, modest house in a retirement community. I didn't tell my father what I was doing. This was my own journey now. I needed to see this man, this ghost, for myself. I booked a flight to Florida. The man who answered the door was a shadow. He was in his late 70s, frail, with a tremor in his hands and eyes that held a deep, watery sadness. The handsome, arrogant young man from my father's stories was gone, replaced by a stooped, tired old man who looked like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Mr. Thorne?" I asked. "Yes," he said, his voice a soft, raspy whisper. "My name is Genevieve Vance. My mother, she was Eleanor Price. My father is Samuel Vance." A flicker of something, recognition, fear, shame, passed through his old eyes. He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly he stepped aside. "He'd better come in," he said. His house was small, meticulously neat, but threadbare. We sat in his small living room. "I always wondered if this day would come," he said quietly, not looking at me. Is your father?" "He's alive. He's 88 now." "And your mother?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "She passed away 2 months ago." A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek. "She was a wonderful woman, the best, and I was a monster." And then he told me his side of the story. He spoke of his own youth, of a young man drowning in the expectations of his powerful family, full of a rage and insecurity he didn't understand. He spoke of his love for my mother, a possessive, immature love that he had confused with real affection. He confessed to the attack, his voice thick with a 50-year-old shame. He didn't make excuses. He called himself what he was, a brute. Your father, he said, looking at me now, his eyes clear with the terrible clarity of hindsight. He did what he had to do, what I deserved. He was a better man than I could ever hope to be. He fought for her. Then he told me the part I didn't know. After that night, my family didn't just make the charges go away. They made me go away. I was a disgrace, an embarrassment, the violent son who had ruined a perfect political alliance. They paid me off, sent me away, and told me if I ever came back, if I ever spoke of it again, they would disown me completely. So I vanished. I drifted for years. The money ran out. I learned what it was to be alone, to have nothing. It was a long, slow, and deserved punishment. I sat there, listening to this old, broken man's confession, and the last pieces of the puzzle fell into place. My father's choice hadn't just saved him from prison. It had, in a way, been part of Marcus Thorne's own family's plan to erase him. There were no villains or heroes in the story anymore. Just flawed, broken people, all bound together by one terrible night of violence so many years ago. My father, I said softly. He wrote a note, the one I found. He asked for forgiveness. He's carried the guilt of what he did to you his entire life. Marcus looked at me, a look of profound, weary sadness on his face. His guilt? He said with a bitter laugh. He has nothing to feel guilty about. He saved your mother from me. He built a good life with her. He won. The only person who needs forgiveness here is me, and I know I can never have it. I left his small, sad house with a heavy heart, but also with a strange sense of peace. The story was complete. The horrifying truth was that there was no single truth, just a tangled, tragic mess of love, violence, pride, and regret. I had set out to understand my father's choice, and in the end, I had found not just an answer, but a kind of grace.
The flight home from Florida felt like traveling between two different worlds, two different lifetimes. I had left a daughter grappling with the ghost of her father, and I was returning as a daughter who had just met the ghost of hers. The truth I carried was a heavy, fragile thing. It was a story with no villains, not really. Just a collection of flawed, passionate, and broken people, all bound by a single night of violence 50 years ago. My father, who had seen himself as a sinner who had gotten away with it. My mother, who had been protected by a lie she never knew. And Marcus Thorne, who had received a life sentence of exile and regret, delivered not by a court, but by his own family. My dilemma on that flight was agonizing. Do I tell my father? Do I tell this 88-year-old man who has lived his entire life with the guilt of what he did, that the man he thought he destroyed was in fact a broken, lonely old man who believed he deserved it? Would that knowledge bring him peace? Or would it simply force him to relive the most traumatic moment of his life? I had unearthed this truth for my own peace of mind, to complete my family's story. Did I have the right to force that completion on him? When I got home, I found him sitting on the porch, just as I had left him. He looked up as I approached, and a question was in his eyes, though he didn't ask it. He knew I had gone searching. I sat down beside him, the quiet evening settling around us. For a long time, we just watched the fireflies begin to dance in the twilight. "He's alive, Daddy," I said softly. My father closed his eyes, a tremor running through his old frame. "I see. He's an old man now, frail. He lives alone in a little house in Florida. He's full of regret." My father didn't speak, but I saw a single tear trace a path through the deep lines on his weathered cheek. I told him Mama had passed, and I told him that I knew the story. He didn't make excuses. He called himself a monster. He said, "You did what you had to do." I paused and then delivered the final, most important piece of the truth. He said you were the better man, Daddy. He said you won. And he said you had nothing to feel guilty about. He let out a sound then, a ragged, choked sob that seemed to carry 50 years of pent-up grief and guilt with it. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, and I put my arm around him, holding my father as he wept for the stranger he had almost killed, for the young man he had been, for the secret he had carried for a lifetime. We sat like that for a long time, father and daughter, as the last light faded from the sky. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clear in a way I hadn't seen them in my entire life. The haunting was gone. He paid his price then, in his own way. Yes, I said, I think he did. And your mother? She never knew any of it? No, I said. You protected her. You gave her a good, peaceful life. That was the choice you made, and it was the right one. He nodded slowly, a deep, profound peace seeming to settle over him. He had been a prisoner of his own secret for half a century, always wondering about the ghost he had created, and I, his daughter, had finally brought him the key to set himself free. In the weeks that followed, I saw a change in my father. A lightness returned to him. The quiet, somber weight that he had always carried seemed to have lifted. He smiled more. He told more stories about my mother, not with the quiet reverence of before, but with a warm, easy joy, celebrating her life without the shadow of the secret between them. The truth, as painful as it had been to unearth, had been a release. My family's history, which I had thought was a simple, straightforward book, had revealed a hidden, complex, and tragic chapter. But in reading it, in understanding it, I hadn't found cause for shame or anger. I had found a deeper, more profound love for the flawed, honorable, and fiercely loving man who was my father. The note in the Bible had said, I ask forgiveness for everything, but I was forced to make this choice. He had asked for forgiveness for the violence he had committed, for the secret he had kept. But as I sat with him on the porch now, watching him finally, truly at peace, I realized he had nothing to be forgiven for. His choice, as terrible as it had been an act of love. And in my journey to understand it, I had not only given my father his peace back, but I had found a deeper understanding of my own history and of the incredible, fierce, and complicated nature of love itself.
In the months that followed my father's full confession, a new kind of quiet settled in our home. It wasn't the heavy, secret-laden quiet of before, but a peaceful, easy silence, the kind shared between two people who have weathered a great storm together and have nothing left to hide. The ghosts that had haunted our family for 50 years had finally been laid to rest, not with forgetting, but with truth. I saw a remarkable change in my father. The heavy, stoic burden he had carried for a lifetime seemed to lift from his shoulders. He was lighter, more present. He would tell me stories about my mother, not just the sanitized, perfect memories, but the funny, messy, real ones. He spoke of her stubbornness, her terrible singing voice, her infectious laugh. He was no longer just the guardian of her perfect memory. He was a man happily remembering the real, complex woman he had loved so fiercely. In unburdening himself of his secret, he had gotten his wife back in all her vibrant, true colors. And I, in turn, had gotten my father back. The man I had always loved and respected became a man I now understood with a profound, almost painful depth. I saw the young man who had made an impossible choice, the husband who had carried a silent guilt, and the old man who had finally found peace. Our conversations were different now, deeper, more honest. We were no longer just a father and a daughter going through the motions of family, but we were two souls who had navigated a labyrinth of secrets and come out the other side, together. My journey of discovery had changed me too. My entire life, I had seen my family history as a simple, straightforward line. Now I saw it for what it was, a complex, messy, beautiful tapestry woven with threads of love, violence, sacrifice, and grace. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. Inspired by this new understanding, I found a new purpose. I took the family Bible with its pages of births and deaths, my mother's old diaries, the fading photographs from the attic, and my own memories of my father's story, and I began to write. I decided to compile our family's true, complete history, not for publication, not for the world, but for us, for my own children and grandchildren. I wanted them to know the real story, not the simplified fairy tale. I wanted them to know the story of their grandfather, a good man who was once pushed to do a terrible thing for love, and of their mother, a woman whose love was strong enough to build a life upon that secret. I wanted them to understand that families are not perfect, that love is not simple, and that our histories are what make us who we are in all their complicated glory. I never contacted Marcus Thorne again. His story was a part of ours, but his journey was his own. I found a strange kind of forgiveness for him in my heart, the quiet pity one feels for a life defined by a single youthful act of cruelty and a lifetime of deserved regret. He was no longer a monster in my mind, just a sad, broken old man, another victim of that one terrible night. My father had found his peace, and in doing so had given me mine. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after I had first found that fateful note, I sat with my father on the back porch. I had just finished writing the last page of our family history. I read the final paragraph to him, a paragraph about a love that was strong enough to endure a 50-year secret and a daughter who was lucky enough to finally understand it. He listened, his eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his face. When I finished, he didn't speak for a long time. "Your mother would have loved that," he whispered finally, his voice thick with emotion. "I know, Daddy," I said, taking his hand. "I know she would." We sat there in the golden afternoon light, the scent of my mother's roses still hanging in the air. The story was complete. The past was no longer a place of secrets, but a source of a deeper, more profound understanding. The note I had found in that Bible had, as the title of my own story once suggested, changed our family history, but it hadn't destroyed it. It had made it whole. And in knowing the whole, messy, tragic, and beautiful truth of who my parents were, I had finally come to understand who I was, and I was at peace.